And tomorrow night, as you mentioned, is in fact the birthday and the Yahrzeit of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber of Lubavitch. And the day after that, on the 10th of Kislev, was his day of redemption. And of course, on the 19th of Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidic teachings, the day of the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. And consequently, tonight, what I'd like to do is to take some teachings of the Alter Rebbe together with the Mittler Rebbe on this week's Parsha and package them to you in a way which will be palatable, as highlighted by our Rebbe in a Sicha which he spoke in 1990. So let's start at the beginning. Vayeitzei Yakov mi Be'er Sheva. What a beautiful Sedra, Yaakov Avinu. In last week's Parsha, he took the blessings from Yitzchak, and Rivka senses that his brother Esav is designing to kill him. And so on their advice, he is told to go to her brother Lavan, who lives in a place called Haran. And the Sedra starts off, Vayeitzei Yakov mi Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Harana. That Yaakov left, he went out of Be'er Sheva, and he went to Haran. Every pasuk, every verse, every story in the Torah is to be understood in its pshat, in its simple level, in its remez, what it hints to, in its drush, in its homiletic understanding, and in its side, in its mystical level of understanding. Let's go straight tonight to the mystical level of interpretation. How is the story of Yaakov's going out to Haran and the entire episode of his marriage of Rachel and Leah, an engagement with Lavan with his sheep, and eventually return to the land of Israel, how is that played out on a mystical level? The Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe in their Sefarim Torah Torah's Chaim explain the following. Vayeitzei Yakov mi Be'er Sheva is the story of the soul descent. A soul comes down from the supernal world and it descends down into this world. Where does it come from? Vayeitzei Yakov. Now Yaakov is Yisrael. Yaakov and Yisrael are synonymous. He has this name change in the Sedra, although even though the name is changed, they are interchanged, unlike Avraham, whose name was changed from Avram to Avraham, who's never again referred to as Avram. Yaakov, even though his name is changed to Yisrael, sometimes he's referred to as Yaakov and sometimes as Yisrael, depending on which level we're talking about. But Yaakov and Yisrael are synonymous, and it refers to the general pool of Jewish souls. In fact, we're told that Adam Harishon, Adam, the first man, contained all souls, and Yaakov contained all Jewish souls within his soul. And consequently, Ma'aseh Avos similar bonim, whatever happened to the patriarchs, is a sign for the children, but in a more direct way, because whatever happened to the collective soul of Yaakov is going actually to happen to his children. So Yaakov, the name Yaakov, is actually made up of two parts. Yud, Akev. Yud is the first letter, followed by the word Akev. Yud is the quintessential letter. It's the smallest letter of the Aleph base, and the letter from which all other letters are made. In the Spheros, Yud represents the Sephira of Chachma. Chachma is koyach ma, the potential for something. The idea of bittul, because the word ma means what, but it also means what, in the sense that what are we? Nachnu ma. So the potential for nothingness is contained in the letter Yud, representing the Sphira of Chachma, the highest Sphira. That comes down in Yaakov all the way to the Akev, the heel. So Yaakov represents the ability to take the highest, most transcendent level all the way down to permeate the lowest heel level. So this Yaakov goes out of Be'er Sheva. Where is Be'er Sheva? So there are in fact two Be'er Shevas. One is called the Be'er Sheva of Avraham. The second is the Be'er Sheva of Yitzchak. The Be'er Sheva of Avraham was called because it says, Kisham Nishbu Shnehem, there, both of them swore. And the Be'er Sheva of Yitzchak is called because of the 7 wells which he dug, Be'er Sheva, the 7th well. In Kabbalah, Be'er Sheva of Avram represents the going out of Avraham, who was the level of Avram, high Av, high Chochma, into his Mekabel, into Bina, from Chochma to Bina, or into the ultimate receptacle in the world of Atzilus, to go from Chochma of Atzilus to Malchus of Atzilus. That's the Be'er Sheva of Avraham. The Be'er Sheva of Yitzchak is to go from Bina, where Yitzchak is represented in Bina. In fact, the Oves, although we usually correlate them with Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes, Avram, Chesed, Yitzchak, Gevura, and Yaakov, Tiferes, they're also represented in Chabad. So Avram is Chochma, Yitzchak is Bina, and Yaakov is Das. So when Bina, which is Yitzchak, goes out into Malchus and further into the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, that's the idea of going out of Be'er Sheva. So Vayeitzei Yakov means the soul comes out of the world of Atzilus, of the world of emanation, in the sense where only godliness exists, and it is transformed into a created entity, which descends down into the worlds and ultimately ends up in the world of Asiya, in the lowest of all worlds. Vayeitzei Yakov mi Be'er Sheva, vayelech, where did it go? Charana. The sages tell us that Charana, the word Charon, comes from the word from Charoin af shel mokim. This is a place that angers God, in the sense that it's a place that can rebel or deny even the existence of godliness. So the soul travels from, if you want, being enveloped within and then basking within the divine light to a place where it's completely challenged. And of course, the question is, why? Lahavin inyan yuridus hanashama lamata. Why did the soul come down into this world? We know that yuridazu, this descent, l'tzoyrach aliyah, is for the purpose of ascent. A general principle that every descent is for the purpose of an ascent. In other words, what the soul gains down in this world, it cannot gain as it was in the higher world. Coming down to this world, the soul has the opportunity to fulfill the purpose of creation, which is, as explained in Tanya chapter 36, Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty desired to have a dira lo yisbarach b'tachtoinim, an abode in the lowest of all realms, of which there are 2 points to it. There's the dira lo yisbarach, there's the actual dwelling for Hashem, but it also must be b'tachtoinim, in the parameters of, designed by, and created by the tachtoinim. So it's necessary for a soul to actually come down, exist in this world, and in this arena of challenge by suppressing the sitra achra, the side of unholiness, and ishapcho chashoichel nahira, the transformation of darkness to light. Specifically, there is the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. Now, that's quite a perilous journey, because it can happen that when the soul enters into the body, which has a nefesh bahamis, an animal soul, which opaques the pristine nature of the godly soul, it could be that the godly soul will not shine through, and that the animal soul will draw the person into the other side of this world. So, what is given to the soul to make sure that that won't happen? Firstly, it comes from Be'er Sheva. Sheva also comes from the word Shavua. Shavua means an oath. Tanya begins with the words Mashbiim oisoi tehi tzadik, the brisa in Masechta Nida, which says that before a soul comes down to this world, it's made to take an oath that it will be righteous and not wicked. The Tzemach Tzedek explains that the word mashbiin can also be read with a sin, masbiin. In other words, the soul is satiated in the supernal gas station with enough petrol, gas that it will need to go on its journey and be successful in its mission when it comes down to this world. So in that Be'er Sheva, it's given everything it needs. In fact, in Tehillim, chapter 44, there is a verse that says, Save Yeshuos Yaakov, commanding the salvations of Yaakov. Chassidus explains the following. The word Yeshuos has as its root the letters Shin Ayin. There are, in a very high world, in the world of Keser, Shin Ayin Nehorin, 370 or 375 supernal lights. These are, if you want, glimmers of the Ur Ein Sof itself. Yaakov, in order to fulfill his mission down here in this world, is filled up with all the necessary spiritual neshek, hardware, military hardware that it will need in order to overcome its battle down here in this world. And that's Masbina. That is a great and gives great confidence to every person, because we all face challenge, we all have obstacles, we all have our ups, we all have our downs. But if we know in our mind and soul that in fact God has already given us everything that we need in order to fulfill our mission, all we need to do is, if you want to draw the money out of the bank, all we need to do is to reveal from within us those sometimes latent, hidden, but potential powers. Then it's not something which Hashem is asking us to do, which is impossible. The Almighty only asks you what is within the realm of the possible. You're not asked to do the complete impossible. And if you're faced with something which seems impossible, it may be from your perspective, but if you dig deeper, and with Siyata Dishmaya, the impossible can become a reality. So, Yaakov Avinu sets out on this perilous journey. And before arriving, he actually does two things. Number one, he spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Ava. He fills himself up with Torah. The Gemara says, Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah Tavlin. Yaakov is about to enter into the world where there is challenge from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination. So he needs a tool, an instrument to combat it. Says the Gemara, I've created a Yetzer Hara, but I've created Torah to combat it. So complete immersion in those 14 years gave Yaakov the fortification, in addition to what he was filled up from his soul before his soul came out, to be able to fight against the Yetzer Hara. Paga b'chama novel says the Gemara, if you bump into this low life of your own Yetzer Hara, mashcheya lebeis hamedrash, schlep him to the house of study, because the Torah study will take care of him. Vayifga b'mokim. Yaakov Avinu, on his way out, stops at Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah, and he has this beautiful vision. He lies down, he takes the stones of the place, he puts them around his head, And he has this vision of the sulam, of the ladder, mutzav arza, whose bottom, whose foot is on the ground, and whose top is up in the heavens. As is well explained in Kabbalah, the sulam is the sulam hatfilah, the ladder of tefillah, and we have explained this previously, the whole aliyah and yurida of tefillah, the going up and coming down of the korbanos, the Sukkah de Zimra, the Birchas Krishma, the Shemona Esra is the ladder going up, and all the various stages after davening are the ladder coming down. This evening, I'd like to focus on a few of the Pesukim which Yaakov tells us before, and he says as follows: Vayifka b'mokim, he comes to the place, Vayikach me'avne hamokim vayosem merashosav. He takes from the stones of the place and he puts them around the head. Of course, there are many, many commentaries which explain why he does this. Let's explain it from a mystical perspective. What are the avnei hamokim, the stones of the place? In Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, which is one of the earliest Kabbalistic texts, it says that 2 stones can build 2 houses, 3 stones can build 6 houses, 4 stones can build 24 houses. How does this work? Because letters are stones. So if you've got the letters Aleph and Base, 2 stones, you can build 2 houses. You can write it Aleph Base or Base Aleph. If you've got 3 letters, Aleph Base Gimel, then you can create 6 houses because the combinations are 3 times 2 times 1. If you've got 4 letters, you can create 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. If you've got 22 letters, plus if you've got 5 final letters, in addition to this 22, you can create a huge number of houses. And it says in Sefer Yetzirah that through the combination of letters, each letter of which is a divine power, by the combination of various divine powers, this is how God creates. And these are the 10 utterances, the Asara Mamore Shabahem Nivra Olam, the idea being that through the combination of letters, so when God said, for example, Yehi Or, let there be light, the combination of the powers behind the Aleph, the Vav, and the Reish create physical light. Now, Yaakov has a look at this world, and he sees them as Avnei Hamokim. He sees them as stones of Hashem, because everything in this world is created by a combination of letters, a combination of those stones being put together. And he puts them, Merashosav, it's explained, higher than his head. Now, Yaakov's head is the Yud, as we explained beforehand. Higher than Yaakov's head is in a place which even transcends the letter Yud. In Chassidus and Kabbalah, it's called the level of Soviv Kol Almin, the letter which is the level of godliness which is peripheral to the worlds. What does this mean? It means as follows. It says also in Sefer Yetzirah, No'ot tchilason v'soifon v'soifon b'tchilason. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the end is wedged in the beginning. The lower the element, the higher it comes from. So the inanimate stone is in fact rooted very high. And ultimately, what Yaakov wants to do is to create out of this stone a monument. He made a monument of it, and he said, this stone which I have made as a monument, as a monument, Yihya Beis Elokim should be a house of God. How can a stone be made into a house of God? Well, today we actually build houses of God with stones. But the deeper element is that Yaakov wanted to transform every echelon of creation, even the lowest echelon, which is the inanimate, and he wanted to make it into a Beis Elokim, a house of God. So Yaakov's quest, his journey, and remember, Yaakov is the collective Jewish soul, is to be within this world, but to transform it, that every echelon of this world should become a house, a vehicle to godliness. Now, Yaakov, it says, takes the stones, puts them around his head, and then suddenly all the stones become one stone. And it says, although it says, Vayikach me'avnei hamokim, he takes from the stones of the place, then it says he took the stone and he placed it as a monument. The stones came together. The reason is because, as we mentioned beforehand, all the stones begin with one stone, and that's the letter Yud. The letter Yud is the one stone that from which follows all the other stones. That letter Yud is the idea of bittul, is the idea of complete nullification. Yaakov also represents Torah learning. He himself was as Ish Tam Yoshev Oholin. The idea of Torah learning is, as explained, Vayeitzei Shemen al Rosha, pouring oil on its head, on the head of the stone, is the idea that when we learn Torah, we're not learning a very fascinating intellect, we're not learning a superb wisdom. Rather, as explained in Tanya chapter 5, what we're actually doing is becoming one with divine wisdom. But in order to do that, one must have complete bittul and nullification, rather like as if one was standing at Sinai. Just as at Sinai, it was quite clear that the Decalogue that was being delivered was directly from the Almighty. Similarly, when we learn Torah on the level of Yaakov, we're completely cognizant of the Yud. That Yud, that bittul, that complete nullification should permeate all through to our Akov, in fact, to our heel. And so, armed with his spiritual 370 lights, his tefillah, his prayer, and armed with the notion that his mission is to set out into the world, and even though it's going to be a very challenging world, nevertheless, what he's out to do is to take everything within the world and to bring it to the level that it becomes a vehicle to the divine. Now, in essence, that's the concept of teshuvah. That's the concept of taking the hay, toshuv hay. Teshuvah is made up of the words toshuv hay, returning the hay. The hay is the representative of the Shekhinah, which has gone into Golus, or Nitzutzei Kedusha, sparks of holiness, which have become, which have fallen, if you want, into the lowest of places, and raising them. So the first arena which Yaakov comes into is that of Lavan, the arena of commerce, of being swindled, of deceit. And within that time, he works extremely hard and be'emunah, with complete faith, and against all odds raises a family who mitasoi shlema. Our sages describe the progeny of Yaakov in the words, his bed was complete. What does that mean? Avraham, say the sages, Yotza mimenu Yishmael. He gave birth to a Yishmael. Yitzchak gave birth to an Esav. But Yaakov, all his children were tzaddikim, were righteous. This is very difficult to understand. After all, Avram and Sarah were two great tzaddikim. How is it possible that Avraham could give birth, even though through Hagar, to a son, Yishmael? Yitzchak and Rivka were great tzaddikim. How is it possible that they could give birth to an Esav? The answer is that although they were great tzaddikim, and Avram's midah, his character trait was that of chesed, however, chesed, an unbridled chesed, can actually give birth to a Yishmael. And it was actually Sarah who told Avraham that he has to send Yishmael away. And to Avram's credit, he listens to Sarah and he sends her away because he understands that when it comes to asay tov, when it comes to chesed, there does have to be a limit to it. Similarly, Yitzchak, his midah was gevura. Now, that can give birth to an Esav. As is explained in last week's Sedra, the reason why Yitzchak wanted to give Esav the blessings is because he perceived the spiritual source of Esav. That was coming from the Oros de Tohu, the lights of the world of Tohu, which are much more powerful and transcendent than of the world of Tikkun. And Yitzchak wanted, through his blessing, to aid Esav in order to help him reveal his spiritual roots. Rivka, being more pragmatic, understands that as Esav was represented down here in this world, he wasn't going to do that. And therefore, she actually conferred both Yaakov and Esav's blessings to be directed towards her son Yaakov as well. Yaakov, on the other hand, it says, mitasa shlema, all his children were tzaddikim, which is quite surprising, actually, because actually we find by Reuven, shebilbel yitzue aviv, there was an occasion where he mixed up his father's bed, and it says that he had to do teshuvah for that. He was punished for that. So how come all the children, it says, were tzaddikim? The Midrash says, because in fact, Reuven was the first one to do teshuvah. In other words, he paved the way for teshuvah. What is fascinating is that Avram, Yitzchak, and then Yaakov. Avram had a child, Yishmael. Yitzchak had a child, Esav. But Yaakov's children, all of whom became the 12 tribes of Israel, mitosei shalema. What did Yaakov possess? What was his ingredient? His ingredient was that he had this element also of teshuvah, because he was filled up, as we said beforehand, before he even went out into the world. He was filled up with this ability of drawing the yud, the quintessence, into the Akev. Let's have a look at Yaakov's life. Yaakov started off his life with his father in the land of Israel. His second challenge was going to the house of Lavan, where he lived for over 20 years, and he had to deal with all sorts of shenanigans, and then come back and deal with his brother. And finally, we're told, at the end of Yaakov's life, he lives for the last 17 years in Egypt, a place of depravity and idolatry. And yet we're told that Yaakov's children, all of whom were tzaddikim. How did he manage that? The answer is that Yaakov, in whichever situation he was, whether he was in the land of Israel, which is the level of a tzaddik, or whether he was with Lavan, which is the level of a Beinoni, in the sense that he's constantly challenged, the Beinoni being constantly challenged, at least in thought, whether he should do what's right or wrong, or whether he was in Egypt, where there was even a question of idolatry. He begged his son Yosef to carry him out of Egypt so that he would not be buried in Egypt and people would make it a shrine of idolatry. In every situation, Yaakov had one task. He had one focus, and that was to create, whether it's in the land of Israel, or whether it's in Lavan, or whether it's meeting his brother Esau, or whether it's in the land of Egypt, in the most depraved land, his goal was to take wherever he was, the Avnei HaMokim, the stones of the place, and to make them into a Beis Elokim, to take the highest and most supernal quintessence and to bring it down and to make a Dira Lo Yisbarach, a dwelling for Hashem wherever he may be. Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim. The actions of the forefathers are an indication for the children. The children throughout the ages have sometimes been in the land of Israel, like we were in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, or we were sometimes in the house of Lavan, or we were sometimes facing Esau, or we were sometimes in Mitzrayim. What we can draw from Vayeitzei Yakov mi Beersheva is that, and this is the lesson which we can learn from this shir, to take into each one of us a lesson, a beautiful lesson from the Parsha, from the Chassidish Parsha, is the following. Each one of us, wherever we may be, it could be you may be living in the land of Israel, or it could be you're living in the diaspora, where the Tzemach Tzedek said, Machda Eretz Yisrael, make the land of Israel wherever you are, because the land of Israel is the land that desires to do the will of its maker. You have the necessary powers to take every echelon of your living experience and to make it a Beis Elokim, a house for Hashem. In your eating, your drinking, your sleeping, your commerce, your free time, your leisure, your learning, your davening, whether it be open engagement in holy matters, Torah and mitzvahs, or whether it be what we would call mundane matters, you can create them that they should be l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, ubechol derachecha dayehu, knowing God in all your ways. And when you do that, you effect a general teshuvah. Teshuvah means that we take this world, every fiber of it, and we bring it back to its divine essence and source, revealing Kvodah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the glory of Hashem in every part of creation. Each one of us is specifically a certain soul in a certain time, in a certain place, and has been given the essential powers that are needed to take the people that you come into contact with, the area in which you live, the home, the family, yourself, and to make it a Beis Elokim. The necessary things are Torah and Tefillah. We need to learn and we need to daven that we should be successful in this quest like Yaakov Avinu did, but the power to do so has been granted. V'shavti b'shalom el beis avi. Yaakov prays that he would like to return in peace to his father's house. His father's house is called Yitzchak. Yitzchak is from the word schok, laughter, joy. The greatest joy above is when we fulfill our mission down here below. When we take a world that's spiritually dark and illuminate it with Neir Mitzvah v'Torah, the candle of mitzvah and the light of Torah. When we take the Avnei HaMokim, when we take the stones of the place, the creation, Hashem's creation, and we reveal the godliness within it, and we make it a conduit and a vehicle for that godliness, that brings tremendous tzachayik, tremendous laughter and enjoyment above. In fact, it says, of all the three patriarchs, when Mashiach will come, the principal will be Yitzchak, because the laughter and the joy which will be then revealed from all our avodah service during the days of Galus, it will be tremendous. And then we'll say to Yitzchak, we understand now the tremendous joy and pleasure that there is from this entire period of Galus, this arduous and very difficult moment in Galus. But as the Rebbe said, we are at the very end of that process, on the cusp of the coming of Mashiach. And consequently, it behooves each one of us at this moment, whether we are in the open religious engagement, whether we are in a challenge moment, or even if we have fallen, we today must pick ourselves up and return those fallen parts and sparks back to their correct place. And whether we're on the level of the tzaddik, the Beinani, or the Baal Teshuvah, it's well known that the Alter Rebbe said that his main uftu, his chidush, his novelty, was the creation of Baalei Teshuvah. And if that was the case in the days of the Alter Rebbe, how much more so in today, when we have the revelation of Hafotzas Amayonos Chutza, of the well springs of Chassidus, the crown jewel, which has been crushed into palatable elixir and medicine and sent around the world by Zoom, by the internet, so that it's reached the farthest, deepest, and most darkest of places. Now is certainly the time that we can return V'shavti b'shalom, in peace to our Father's house, and we can come back to our Father's house in peace, as the Alter Rebbe said, Pada b'shalom nafshi, his soul was redeemed in peace, with the peace of learning Torah, both its revealed parts and its inner part, which reveals the inner soul, which reveals the inner dimension of the world, which ultimately will reveal, as the Rambam finishes his magnum opus, U'mal ha'aretz de'as Hashem, that the whole world will be full of the knowledge of Hashem, kamayim layom mechasim, as waters cover the sea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Dubov. We truly appreciate it. We really do look forward to it. And thank you to everyone. Have a great evening.